Race doesn't limit you from anything.
It's all about
I feel
identity.
like they learn about race from, I teach them
When even
about race.
about who you are with somebody else that looks like you.
And love who you
to
are.
love themselves.
Identity.
This is In My Skin, a podcast about race and childhood. I'm Adam Flanagan. Watching artist and illustrator Floyd Cooper create art is like watching a magic trick. Using an eraser on a special kind of canvas, he creates images seemingly out of nothing. Listen to the oohs and ahs he gets from an onlooking crowd as he demonstrates his technique at the 2004 National Book Festival.
Up another can of worms. I'm just going to see if we can put a few simple shapes here very quickly, just to show you how something begins to emerge. Can you see it yet? Let me erase a little bit more. You can add the smallest of detail with this eraser. It's really, really easy to do.
As an art novice, it's incredible to watch him turn a blank vessel into, in this case, a measured portrait of a Native American person in mere seconds. If you're confused by the description, trust me, Floyd explains it much better in the interview. What struck me about the technique, though, was how the dark sepia tones on the empty canvas are the perfect way to establish skin tones of characters. Turns out, that's part of why Floyd Cooper creates art the way he does, to showcase not only black characters, but characters of all different skin tones too. Race isn't just part of his work, it is at the core of every piece he creates. Cooper has illustrated more than 100 books, and has taken home multiple Coretta Scott King Awards for books like The Blacker the Berry, one of his first collaborations with author Joyce Carol Oates. But we started off by talking about his own childhood, growing up in Oklahoma, and bouncing around to just about every school Tulsa had to offer.
I believe it must have been, second or third grade. There was a white student in our class, and he was a young man. He didn't have. There weren't any other of his race in our class anyway, and he was gifted in science. And so whenever we did things that required sort of scientific things like hooking up the light system for our spelling bee, the buzz-in lights and all that, he would do all the wiring and stuff like that. And we became friends. He and I were good friends. And because I was also rather on the upper end as far as ability at that level. So I made A's, good grades, and that sort of thing. So I was in a certain sort of zone, I guess you could say. I was fighting most of my career to not be the teacher's pet, because I was trying to fit in with my friends, and so there was a little bit of dumbing down on my part for a while there, just trying to so I wouldn't be too bright, and that's kind of how things were started. When I met this guy, I forgot his name. He was also very bright. We were very, very good friends. So I had someone else that I could sort of hang out with and relate to on that level, on an intellectual level, I guess you'd say. As intellectual as second grade could possibly be.
So was race something that was discussed at home?
Well, yeah. I mean, my folks, we all followed the politics of the day and that whole context, the climate of what was going on. I do remember being in third or fourth grade, probably third grade. We were outside playing. It was very cold, and the grass was yellow, and it was chilly, and all the kids were running over towards a hurricane fence that sort of sealed in the playground. And we grabbed onto the fence, and I looked through and I see what they were running for. It was a big black limousine with flags on all four corners, and there was an entourage of men coming up to the fence, and it turned out to be that was President Johnson's car, and he had pulled over to come up to the fence to greet some of the students there at this all-black school. And I can remember distinctly putting my fingers through the whirlpool fence there, and he, with his fat thumb and forefinger, pinched my finger. And I only saw him from the back as he was walking off. but I still remember the day I met President Johnson.
Huh?
As far as the politics, we were President Kennedy, and my mother would always tell us the facts about what was really going on, particularly when the assassination of Dr. King and all that happened, and of course the assassination of President Kennedy. We lived through all that, both Kennedys, and so we weren't shielded from any of that. We were given the full view and the full story behind all that.
How did your parents talk about race with you?
Well, my folks were divorced when I was young, very young. So it was mostly my mother raising us. My dad was actually shot by a white man on Greenwood Avenue. He was shot in the back and through the back of his neck, and he survived. But it was a pretty traumatic experience for me, being the oldest in my family. To sort of live through that, and with the understanding that I had, being old enough to understand what had gone on. But that was one of my earliest incidents with dealing with race.
Man, it's terrible. Their father got shot. How did you?
What was the incident? What was the things that led up to the shooting?
Yeah.
Really always doing that.
And how did you process it? Like, I guess as being a young kid going through that.
Well, we were just happy that he lived, and that he was able to. He actually, now, my dad was sort of on the wild side, I guess. He actually escaped from the hospital on a bed sheet because he didn't want to be operated on. There was a bullet in his head about an inch from getting to where his brain was, and they told him that it was a very risky operation, and that they couldn't guarantee the outcome. And so rather than go through that, he just sort of said, I'm going to stay where it is, go without the operation, and he climbed out the window of the hospital.
So what was that like for you, kind of, that's a pretty dramatic way to have a really experience with a race, having a white man shoot your father.
Yeah, well, it didn't really impact me in the way that it was like a purely racial thing, My father drank and hung out a lot down in the honky tonks and the juke joints down there on Greenwood, and so it could have been a white man or anybody that could have shot him. I mean, he's down there in that environment, but it just happened to be a white man, and that's how I processed it.
Okay. What about kind of media as a child? Was there any books or shows or anything that you watched that showed the African American experience that spoke to you?
Oh, no. We didn't see much African Americans on TV at that point. I was born in '56, and so I grew up in Tulsa through the '60s, and we didn't really have much as far as things like that, TV shows. I can remember Julia, which was a black TV show that came on back in the day, and I remember when Flip Wilson got his TV show, and so there were incremental sort of little things that happened throughout the years, but I don't really have a timeline for it. You know how your memory just sort of mashes everything together here. I could probably have taken the time, go back and look. I never thought about sort of piecing together a timeline of the cultural impacts on me as a child, so it would take me a moment to go back and try to give you an accurate, logical. But I remember Julia, I remember Flip Wilson, and then later probably Red Fox and those shows, Sanford. So I guess that came a little bit later, but that was very slim pickings.
Was Ezra Jack Keats? Were those books around whenever you were growing up?
Oh, we didn't have picture books and that sort of thing in my environment. There could have been a few in the library. I do remember having one book. It was a little book. There was a collection of Anderson's fairy tales. Could have been Anderson's or Grimm, the Grimm brothers. But I think it was. I do recall one little golden book. One was about a bear, but my favorite one was about a little fire truck, and there was no cover on it, so I don't remember what the cover looked like. But a friend recently sent me a cover of that book. I didn't know they were still making it, and it had the cover on it. But I remember the little red fire engine book that I had. Some of the pages ripped or whatever, and so that was my earliest picture books that I can recall. I didn't really have an experience with picture books until after I'd gone to college and was hanging out with my girlfriend who wanted to be a teacher, and I attended some of her classes and went through some of the homework that she had, and one of the assignments had to deal with putting together a picture book list. She was an early childhood major, and we took a sort of a picture book kind of a class for some extra credit.
So how did that experience with that kind of introduction to picture books as an older adult, how did that experience kind of show you, how did you come to understand the impact of children's books then?
None whatsoever. It was just a course. It was extra credit, and I like some of the stories, but it wasn't anything that sort of hit me to something that, hey, I want to do this. Mm-hmm. My whole goal was to grow up, become an illustrator. At that point, become an illustrator and get into the studio market and advertising illustration, where some of my heroes were making huge bucks, making money in advertising, illustration, and those types of jobs. Studio artists, working for studios. And so that was my real drive. That's what drove me to work for, initially to get to New York. It was on, after, and I'm going to jump ahead a bit, it was after having arrived in New York that this was one of the doors that opened for me, and that's how I ended up in picture books.
So how did the door open for you?
Well, I stumbled around looking for agents and, pounding the pavement, meeting a whole lot of sort of fly-by-night situations. Some worked out, some didn't, getting little jobs here and there, but eventually found an agent who was able to give me work, lots of work. And it was in the textbook industry. It was a company called Kirchhoff Wahlberg, and they were able to give me work right away, and I sort of found a way to piece together a good income to pay my, not a good income, but enough money to pay my bills and remain in New York without returning home, and by getting these textbook jobs to do. And they happened to also be connected with the publishing industry. And unbeknownst to me, they were taking my work around to the publishing houses. And one that they took it to was Patty Gouch at Penguin Books. And she saw my work, and they wanted to ask me first, I guess it was sort of like a test, to illustrate one spread from a book called Grandpa's Face. And I illustrated it, and then they came with the rest of the book and asked me to make the pictures for it. And I thought it was another textbook job because it had come through that agent, and I did it very, very fast, too fast actually. Completed the art and sent it back in, and comes back with my name on it, written by Eloise Greenfield, and that was Grandpa's Face, my first picture book.
At what point in your writing of children's books did you start to understand the impact that these books could have? Or you're illustrating a picture book.
It was a gradual thing, and I can't pinpoint one exact sort of moment, but it was pretty obvious to anyone that these books were for children and that the images that you made would be impactful to children. And that little class that I took with my girlfriend in college, where we were able to, part of the plan was to put together a children's book list, and this children's book list would conceivably be one that she would have used in her classroom, and so there would be criteria involved with her picking and selecting those books and how she would apply that to her curriculum for a kindergarten classroom. And so we knew that books sort of played into a child's education, and that sort of brought some of that stuff back to me as I was working on picture books, and I began to realize the impact of it. But it was also the fact that Grandpa's Face came out with quite a splash. I mean, people said wonderful things about it. I got lots of praise in the media. I immediately got some more contracts to do. I mean, it was a pretty successful entry into the market, I think. And I began to do speaking engagements, and I would meet these people involved in the children's book industry, and they took me under their wing, basically. I met, for instance, Augusta Baker, the famed librarian from the New York City era, 1930s. She was a famed librarian, along with Carolyn Wicker Fields, of course, here in Pennsylvania. She was a white lady. Augusta was black, and they together formed a sort of thing that they would have sort of drive their careers. And she pulled me aside and told me what that was, and it was the idea that what she wanted to do was to put a book about a little black child into the hands of a little white child, and put a book about a little white child into the hands of a black child. And I'm sure Mrs. Field felt the same way. She was totally different. She was probably a mirror personality of Augusta here in New York. She was in Pennsylvania, and she wore long white gloves past her elbow, and talked with a highly British accent. I believe I've never heard her speak, but I've heard her described that way. And she only believed in the very best of a thing for a child. That was her sort of mantra. So together they would try to give the children something more than just eye candy or just entertainment. They strive to make the picture book a meaningful experience in a way that will impact society as a whole, and sort of help to bring us together. They knew that picture books and children were the front lines when it came to making the world better, because as children get older, they get set in their ways, and of course adults, you can never change their minds about anything. So I'll get them, but books could be very impactful, and they pass this sort of thing on to me early on.
We wanted to take a quick break to thank some of our sponsors that help make In My Skin possible. In My Skin is part of the University of Pittsburgh P.R.I.D.E program, which stands for Positive Racial Identity Development and Early Education. P.R.I.D.E is funded by the W.K. Kellogg and Henry L. Hillman Foundations. Thank you both for making this possible. Now, back to my interview with Floyd Cooper.
Before we get in any further into talking about some of the specific books I want to talk about the process that you do, how you create this art. And it's fascinating to me. I mean, I've seen some videos, and you refer to it as erasing. And in watching your demonstrations, it has the appearance as if like there's something beneath the background that you're like unveiling as you wipe it away, but it's obviously not. It's you erasing art. You erasing and creating at the same time. So you can probably describe this much better than me. So how do you describe your process?
Well, yeah, I suppose looking at it from the audience point of view, it would look like, I guess, I was erasing something that was there. But what I'm looking at when I do it is I'm focusing on the shape itself and how it connects to the next shape next to it. And so it's more of a surface thing for me, not so much what's underneath the paint, but just what happens as these shapes on top of the surface sort of connect together. And it's something that after all these years of doing it, it's almost instinctive, and it's much easier for me to actually do it and show than to try to explain how it happens. But for me, that's what it is. It's just a matter of erasing the shapes that are on the surface of the background, and sort of letting it come out, letting it evolve on its own, basically. I'm just a bystander.
So,
the picture paints itself.
There you go. If only it was that easy.
The Ouija board or something. I don't know. Just sort of, it's something that develops after having done it for a long time. It's sort of why I guess it looks the way it does.
So in the process, after erasing, before you add color, you're left with at least in the images that I saw, you're left with like a monochromatic image with various shades of more or less like one color. And so I'm wondering, because obviously so many of the, not obviously, but so many of the children that and so many of the characters that you illustrate are African American in of varying skin shades and colors. And
that's right.
So I'm wondering if that having that monochromatic, the shading and everything, if that helps you in any way, whenever you're thinking of adding color and creating different skin tones for people.
Yes, you really tapped on to something. Are you an artist?
I am not, but I am taking that as a very high compliment coming from you.
Well, yeah, you've really keyed in on exactly what's going on there. I use that burnt umber color because it's present in everyone's skin, no matter what race, just varying degrees. To me, the brown, the burnt umber is like melanin, right? Mm-hmm. And so I just sort of take away more or less, depending on the shade of the complexion that I'm after. But it's always middle ground. I can go darker, or I can go lighter after I've done the initial erasing of the images and shapes. So what you see in that monochromatic image is just sort of like a middle tone, meant to be sort of like an underpainting. And I go on top with white paint and dark paint to sort of separate the tones even more, depending on the situation.
Okay, so that makes sense. And it's really cool to. We'll include video links to this on our website, racepride.pit.edu, to show people how they can hear, so they can watch what it is we're talking about. Because, like you said, it's easier to watch than for us to explain.
Now, where did you get the video, if I might ask? Is it?
I believe there's a video on the Library of Congress, has one back from 2004.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was in the 10th there, I guess, right?
Yeah, I believe so. But
okay, all right.
It's really cool to see. So I'm wondering, Floyd, how do you think your identity as an African American man has affected the type of books you want to illustrate, as well as the type of books you are asked to illustrate?
Oh, well, I take on that the mantra of being a role model and contributing to the the voice of that we're trying, for diversity, and I take that on full force, fully, because I'm all for that. I know some want to just simply, and initially I was that way. I wanted to simply illustrate what other artists were illustrating and not be pigeonholed or sort of confined to one sort of cultural neighborhood. And that was important back in the 80s when I was working on books. But there are other issues. The climate has changed, and it's more important, I believe, now to not so much be so limited in that. Now, there are people who are actually had started illustrating outside of their cultural neighborhood to a bit of a backlash with the Own Voices movement, that movement where they feel that black stories should be told by black illustrators and authors. Black creators should be the one whose voices we see when it comes to the books that are produced about black culture. And so, and likewise, I'm sure with other people of color in their own areas as well, like Latina and maybe even Asian, so there is a big push right now, and I can feel it. It's probably got still a ways to grow as far as big as it'll be, but I can see it kind of on coming, this Own Voices movement. And so it just sort of shows that you have to be careful when you do that sort of thing. But, I really don't put the onus on the creators. I think creativity is something that shouldn't be hindered no matter what. If you feel like writing a story about Louis Armstrong or whatever, no matter what your race is, you have some insight in that, and you have done your homework, and you know exactly what it is you're doing, and it's a real positive or a real accurate or a valid message about Louis Armstrong, then you should be able to do that. I believe that the onus is on the gatekeepers, the people who publish the books. They do need to have more opportunities for black creators, Latino creators, creators of color, because that is not being addressed as it should be. I don't have statistical numbers or anything to break down my particular stance on this, but I can say that I have been to several conferences and things, and I have heard people talk about it, and I know I wouldn't be surprised that if it were that it is the case that there is a lack of diversity when it comes to the creators. Are the people who write the stories that are about different cultures. I've illustrated several books with white authors based on a black either figure or story, and it continues today. And I wouldn't. And many of them are my friends, and I don't mean to slight their efforts one bit. And you can't really blame them. They're just expressing their creativity. I think it's wonderful. What better way to understand or to have empathy for someone than to actually walk in their shoes? And I don't think there's a better way to do that than to take on someone's story and learn them and read about them and research them and then know their story and really come close to how they lived. And that's the only way you're going to make a good book about them anyway. So to do that, to go through that process is a great way to actually gain empathy, as well as having the book reach market. Now, there's another sort of thing that happens in life where people tend to gravitate to things that are like themselves. We pick up books that are about ourselves. We tend to only want to get things that are about ourselves, and so it takes a little bit of extra work to open up a book or to get a book that is about a different culture. First of all, there's not a full understanding of the culture. It takes a little bit of work to get to the point that you understand it. And that work is where things sort of hit the skids, this is a slight on humanity, but we're lazy, basically. We don't like to do work to find out things. That's why our political situation is currently where it is. We just want to sort of simplify things and bring things down to its simplest form so it's easily digestible so that we can move on, and not have to work for it, and not have to do the research to find out who's the best candidate, If I'll just stick with my political party and just cross the board, boom, So that's basically, and actually I could talk about that a little bit more, but I happen to believe that leads us into certain situations that we're in now, If you look, for instance, at this whole blackface thing, and you realize where blackface came from, not many people know. They think it's just, something that you could do for Halloween or whatever, and it'd be okay to do that, not realizing the history of that. And learning the history of that takes work, and no one wants to go back and find out why that is, why that happened, why Jim Crow actually became a thing. No one wants to know that it was actually started by a white man, a minstrel show, and he started jumping Jim Crow as a minstrel act, and boom, Jim Crow was born, and it was the first blackface character. It was a minstrel show. No one wants to know about that, and they just want to basically have it all sort of readily, easily accessible, and that leads to problems because many things are complicated about our different cultures, and we have to be willing to take the time to learn about them. And that's why I like children's books, because we can tend to put out historical things about ourselves and sort of break stereotypes and show that we're full human beings at a level where we can be impactful to society, the young level, and that's why I really still enjoy doing what I do, breaking those stereotypes. There was a guy, Chinua Achebe, who said that the whole idea of a stereotype is to simplify. And you make it simple because that's the way you're going to get people to digest it, right? The problem is that stereotype becomes a lot of negative sort of implications that can be characterized to classify an entire people, and it can enable you to then deny them their full rights of citizenship based on certain traits that you see portrayed in a stereotype, and these things perpetuate, and before you know it, you have a whole class of people being denied citizenship or being denied certain aspects of humanity that would be afforded to others whose culture may be closer to something that you can understand. So it's this lack of understanding in the world that we're fighting against. And I've been at this for a few years now, and I would have hoped that we would have made some progress, but I understand now that it's going to take a while. It's going to be slow, but we shouldn't give up. We should keep going. And so I really welcome black story and stories from other races and other cultures and a sharing of these things, because this is what's going to bring us together. And it's at that point that we're learning about the world that it has its most impact. And that's why picture books, I believe, are very important and to the whole mix of early education and the things that are learned in the classroom, of course. But picture books is one way that I can help to contribute to that whole thing.
And I think
I don't mean to wax on too much here.
No, not at all. I think that your books are special too in that they make different worlds that you're talking about accessible to people with your imagery. I feel like so much of your imagery is there's like a kindness that's rooted in a lot of your imagery, and there's a lot of care and love shown to the characters that you illustrate. And it's also interesting to me how they have there's a lot of historical figures that you've illustrated, and I know, and it was interesting because I had read that you also weren't not a big fan of history as a child, yet here you are illustrating books about Frederick Douglass, the ballerina Janet Collins, Langston Hughes, Revolutionary War spy James Lafayette, like all these different people. So I'm wondering if you see illustrating these figures as a way to present history and these different African American figures to children in a way that might intrigue them, and maybe in ways that you weren't shown growing up.
Wow, exactly. In fact, if you don't mind, I may have to borrow that from you. That's exactly what's going on there, I'm sure. I will say that I love history now, by the way. I love it a lot. And I also follow politics a lot more than I used to. I didn't love baseball too much as a child. I love baseball now. So, I mean, we grow into things, right? So teachers, please have hope that yes, it will get better. You know, just what you're doing will go in and will pay off later, perhaps down the road. But yes, absolutely. That's what I would like to do. I can remember what it was like as a child. You know, I still have that. I believe it's a gift. It's the ability to recall what that was like. You know, and then when I do a book about history, I hope to make it a little bit more accessible, a little bit more interesting, and you know, to help a student reach that epiphany a lot sooner than I did, and perhaps start loving history a little bit earlier than I did.
Yeah.
Hopefully based on something that I drew.
Well, I think you're well on your way. I'm sure there's some kids that have seen things differently through your books, but I want to ask about the as I know you've worked, you've illustrated and written some books, and you've illustrated books written by other wonderful authors. And one in particular, you seem to really have a connection with the late poet and author Joyce Carol Thomas. And you both combined for several books and were honored by Coretta Scott King Awards multiple times. And,
yes.
And I'm wondering how does having that kind of connection, and I only say that just because it seems like you two are in sync with the words and everything just seems really in sync on the page. And
well, you are pretty amazing to pick and perceptive to pick these things out, because you're absolutely correct. She was my favorite author, and there is something to that, it would seem. I think I could argue that based on my experience that the connection you have with the text and with the author will play a role in its success, and how you're able to sort of make or reach deeper when creating it, and to pull out maybe perhaps a greater art, you know, because you're a little bit more in love with it. Yes, your passion for your art does reflect. It does come out, you know, the level of passion that you have for what it is that you're illustrating, be it the work of the text, or maybe even the author, although, of course, her work was as beautiful as she was, you know. Joyce Carol Thomas, I don't know, it's just some sort of accident sort of that happened there as far as our meeting. I didn't know she would happen to be from Oklahoma, like myself. So we were actually accepting the Coretta Scott King Honor Award for Brown Honey and Broom Wheat Tea, and we were up on the dais, and then I realized from her introduction that she was from Oklahoma, a little town just north of where I grew up. She was from Parker City, and I was from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and so it was pretty I guess, downright spooky, that these events were happening this way. Here it is with this author whose work I connected with, and perhaps it has something to do with who she was as a person, growing up from the same part of the world that I was from. Maybe it has a lot to do with it. It's beyond my realm of explaining it, though. So I'll just sort of let it lie. But yeah, she was a very special person, and I enjoyed tremendously every time she produced anything. I enjoyed not only reading it, but to be able to illustrate it as well was a blessing.
And I think your connection is
rest in peace.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that your connection is particularly evident in Black of the Berry, and it's a powerful book, and it really takes a thoughtful approach to addressing difference in skin tones between African American children. And so I'm wondering just when illustrating that book, do you have a particular audience in mind? Do you have anybody that you illustrate for when you're illustrating a book like that?
Well, that particular book, of course, most African Americans can tell you that there's always been sort of this unsaid sort of thing within the Black community. There was a hierarchy of skin tone, and we all know the jokes that were made, the memes, and the stories that went along with, being born of a certain complexion. And it all goes back to life on the plantation, I'm sure, where the slave masters would implement this sort of hierarchy by the way they treated the lighter-hued or the lighter-skinned slaves. They were mostly given jobs in the big house as opposed to having to live in the quarters, where they kept the darker-skinned people who also worked in the field and would become even darker under all that hot sun. So that hierarchy was established early on, and people, without realizing it, began to take on that sort of not judgment, but that sort of status kind of a thing that was applied to skin color. And it's still with us today in certain aspects. I don't know if you saw that recent post by the football player with his white wife. He gave a toast. They both gave a toast, and they were with all other mixed-race couples, and they all toasted. Here's to, this is stupid, here's to light-skinned kids. And I was like, whoa. A lot of people are still upset about that, that he would actually make a toast like that, But I'm sure he was kidding, but some people don't take it that way. But it just let me know that these things are still out there,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's something that we talk about, I know, with a lot of our parents at the Pride program, is just colorism in general. And it's something that a lot of people don't, it seems like something that happens as kids and when you're young, but then you don't quite really fully realize it until a little bit older. Well, it's the kind of things that happen.
Absolutely.
So I want to get you out of here on this, Floyd. I know you've illustrated many, many books. What's the count at currently for the amount of books that you've illustrated?
I believe it's 107.
107, past the century mark.
It's 107 by my count. My wife will probably tell you something different. She's probably counting strictly trade books, but I've done quite a few books that became trade books. And, early on, before I had an agent, I got burned a few times by doing a book that was supposed to be just sort of a different type of book that became a trade book. And, that I'm counting those and other books, sort of book series as well. But if you were to count purely trade books, mass market trade books, there would probably be at least 100, maybe.
So through the process of illustrating, whether it's the impact of the book or whether it's the process or the actual physical creating the art, where do you derive the greatest satisfaction as an artist?
Oh, it's still in the art. It's still the actual painting and seeing what comes from moving, paint materials and media around to hit that perfect little chord that happens when a painting just sort of comes together and sings. Just sort of something that sort of happens almost on a sort of maybe a a musical level. It's just something that happens when it all comes together just right, and it sings. So it's still trying to get that.
All right, Floyd Cooper, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, absolutely.
In My Skin is a production of the University of Pittsburgh P.R.I.D.E program, which stands for Positive Racial Identity Development and Early Education. P.R.I.D.E is part of Pitt's Office of Child Development. You can find every episode of In My Skin at the P.R.I.D.E website, racepride.pitt.edu, where you can also find a video of Floyd Cooper demonstrating how he makes his art. Trust me, you want to check it out. It's something you have to see to believe. Music for this episode is by Blue Dot Sessions. This episode was produced by me, Adam Flango, along with P.R.I.D.E Director Dr. Aisha White and P.R.I.D.E Director of Engagement Medina Jackson. Make sure to follow the P.R.I.D.E program on social media, and if you like the podcast, tell a friend about it.